Welcome to Behold. I'm Beth, and today I have a guest with me. It's just Craig, but I call him Dr. Hardinger in this episode because we get to learn about some church history. I really knew very, very, very little about this, and it is fascinating to hear about this really important turning point in church history, how it connects back to the Bible, and what it means for us today. Now, if you're a parent listening or watching and you've got your kiddos with you, you might want to give us a listen through first because there's some war talk and there's a couple little graphic points that you may not want your kiddos listening to. But it is a great episode. I learned so much. I'm so encouraged about Jesus' faithfulness from this episode. So here we go. Hey, Craig.
How you doing, Beth?
I'm good. It's a gorgeous spring day, and we're in a windowless room.
I know it.
Whose idea was that?
It's not my idea.
Mine either.
Not my idea, but it is an incredible day.
It is.
I'm ready for spring, too.
Me
I really
too.
am.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
I'm ready for it. Yeah.
So, you are something like me,
Mhm.
and when it comes
Scary.
to Christian media,
Yes.
we're a little bit of a skeptic.
Contrarian.
I watched one too many bad Christian movies when my daughters had to do the media fast when they were in high
Oh,
school.
yeah. You probably watched them all then.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of mediocre would be being kind.
Yeah, yeah,
Shows and movies and such.
yeah.
But
Yes.
I took a chance and Bruce and I started watching The Chosen.
Mhm.
What are we, 4 years behind?
And I don't know why that is, because another family that we both know
Yes.
started.
Yep.
Debbie and I just started.
Yes.
And so I don't know what the deal is.
It's
but-
like, okay.
yeah.
I'll give it
It's
a try.
probably the algorithms that we
It's
talked about last show.
Yes. But also, so we started watching The Chosen, and we also have watched The House of David.
We haven't seen
series.
that one yet.
It's interesting. Like, who knows if all of this really happened? Like, there's
Yeah.
a lot of filling in the blanks,
Mhm.
but it's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting to go, oh, I wonder if that's what David really looked like, or wow, was Goliath really that? And then you read it. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, 9 feet. That's pretty dang tall.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just kind of fun to put some imagination into your Bible reading.
Well, and obviously there are detractors with that.
Yes.
And I, like with we haven't seen House of David, but with Chosen, of course there are blanks being filled in. But I think Debbie and I just started season 4 last
Okay.
night. And in my opinion, they have done so well in staying honest to the text,
Yes.
but filling in some of those blanks. And what one of us, when we've been reading the Bible, we're wondering, I wonder what that looked like. I wonder, how did they do the feeding of the 5,000? Or what did it look like for Jesus to walk on the water? And we have our imaginations. And I think the Chosen they've done a great job employing our imagination to fill in some of those blanks. We've loved it. We really have.
Well, it makes you want to read your Bible a
Yeah.
little more.
Yeah.
Even if you're just like, wait a minute, did
Yeah.
that really happen?
Yeah.
Although
No,
the
we can do
funny comment from my hubby that, John the Baptist walks out and he's like, that's not what he looked like. And we just cracked up.
I agree. I was a little disappointed with the casting for John the Baptist, but that's fine.
But
You know.
in my head, I have, children's storybook Bibles
Right,
or
right.
flannel graph
Yeah.
or write these images that probably are way less accurate
Yeah.
than these actors that they're
absolutely.
casting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, that's been,
We've enjoyed it.
it's
Yeah.
been fun.
Mhm.
So if you're a skeptic like we are,
Yes. Yeah.
one too many bad Christian TV shows or movies, give The Chosen
Give it a
and
shot.
House of David a
Yeah.
chance. And
It's
let
on
us know what you
Prime.
think.
I think it's on,
Amazon Prime.
It's on
Mhm.
Prime.
Yeah. All right. Well, today, everyone loved our 2 episodes about the 400 silent years.
Mhm.
And so in light of that, we decided to have at least one history episode this season.
Mhm.
And we're calling it a turning point in church history.
Mhm.
And so I did my research by going on Wikipedia and typing in what we're going to talk about and browsed the article. Didn't
Right.
even read every word because it's kind of a long, there's
a long
lots
story.
of sections
Yeah.
to the Wikipedia article.
Yeah.
But thank the Lord, we have you. And you, in the past, have been a professor of church history.
Mhm.
So just the right person to help us understand the fall of Jerusalem.
Thank you so much for that build up. I appreciate it. But
you are like you have taught church history at Western Seminary.
Yep.
That was when I was working for you and I got to prepare your PowerPoint. So I learned a lot just kind of by osmosis.
Yeah.
But this is not something we Christians learn about very often.
It's not.
Because it doesn't really talk about Christians, right?
Yeah.
But it is a big turning point in church history.
It is a huge turning point.
So, Dr. Hardinger.
Here we go.
Professor.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, I mean, the reason why it's a turning point, you were exactly right in that you got to look to see where it involves the church.
Yep.
And we'll talk about that probably at the end of the story. But we're talking about the fall of Jerusalem, which is AD 70.
So that means 70 years after Jesus died, give or take a few years,
More like
right?
37.
Okay.
Because Jesus died around 33, AD
that's
33.
right. That's right.
And he predicted the fall of Jerusalem in Matthew 24. We'll look at that in a few minutes.
Yep.
And so in AD 70 is when Jerusalem actually fell. But it actually started before that. And so for me, the backstory to the fall of Jerusalem is far more interesting than the actual fall. And that sounds really morbid, but I mean, just the buildup of it was huge. And one of the things that we have to understand is Judea at that time was under Roman rule. It was started by Julius Caesar about 60 years before the time of Christ. And so the Jews were basically an oppressed people, kind of. But they were tolerated by the Romans because that was a profitable section of land in the Roman Empire.
They were earners.
And they paid taxes. But the problem was Judea wasn't just filled with Jews. There were also Greeks and Samaritans and people of other nationalities. And like any place else, you take sinful people who are different racially, they're going to hate each other. And around 66 AD 60, I keep forgetting, you're supposed to say AD 66. Instead of 66 AD. And I learned it both ways. The Greeks and the Jews in a town called Caesarea by the Sea. It's just northwest of Jerusalem.
Is that Caesarea Philippi that we read about?
Caesarea Philippi is way up north.
Oh, so it's a different Caesarea.
That's why they say it's Caesarea by the Sea.
Okay.
Beautiful city. Even to this day, the ruins are just incredible. It's just really pretty. But there was a very large Greek population and a very large Jewish population, and they despised each other. And the reason why the Greeks despised the Jews is because Rome allowed the Jews to have their own religion. Because the Jews were the only monotheistic group at that particular time, and the Christians were included under the umbrella of Jewish protection. And so the Romans didn't feel really threatened by Christians because they believed in this monotheistic God as well. And they used the same language and all that kind of stuff. And so the Christians enjoyed that freedom under Roman rule.
They were kind of lumped in the same category.
Lumped
Jews
into the
and
same
Christians.
category, yeah.
You know, there was a lecture at William Jessup a couple of months ago that unfortunately you weren't able to go to. And he talked about the Roman rule and the different, like the Romans' view of gods. And there were so many and how different the view of Christians. Because Jesus, God would never come and sacrifice for you. But anyway, just that was trickling all these
thoughts. The Romans had a God for everything. Everything.
And they had to appease these gods.
If you wanted to have children, there's a God for that. If you want to go fishing, there's a God for that. If you're going to war, there's a God for that. I mean, and it's, there's an app for that. In Roman rule, there was a God for that kind of thing. The Greeks and the Jews, they despised each other, jealous of each other. And what had happened is that the Greeks were upset because the Jews had some back taxes that they were not being held accountable for. And what they'd done in Caesarea Philippi is they had sacrificed some birds on the steps of the synagogue in Caesarea Philippi, which would be probably a 21st century equivalent to a burning cross on your lawn.
It was defiling.
And so the Jews, they engaged in battle. They started fighting the Greeks, and the Roman soldiers stood around watching. I mean, the historical account is that the Roman soldiers did nothing until the Jews paid the Roman soldiers to join them in the fight, and they did. And they wiped out all of these Greeks. It was a bloodbath in Caesarea Philippi. Well, there was a procurator, like Pilate in the Gospels was a procurator. The next procurator at this time was a guy by the name of Gassius Florus. Who wants to have a name Gassius?
I was going to say, not if you're in middle school.
I wasn't going to go there,
Well,
Beth,
come on. Let's get real.
I know. But Gassius Florus, and he despised the Jews. He was perfectly happy to make them mad. And so what he had done, he says, all right, you guys owe some back taxes. And so Gassius took some of his soldiers in Jerusalem, and they went into the temple court, a place where Gentiles were not allowed to go. And they basically took probably the equivalent of $10 million out of the coffers of the temple. And the Jews could do nothing. And so what they did, and this is in the courtyard, they surrounded the courtyard and they began passing a plate mocking Gassius Florus. Mocking, Florus is so poor.
Let's take up an offering.
Let's take up an offering. And they were just humiliating Florus.
Whoa.
And Florus said, you're done. And he went in and he killed them all.
Oh, wow.
Many of them through crucifixion.
Oh.
And that's what launched the Jewish War of AD 66.
Okay.
And so Rome got involved because the Jews began to have these skirmishes where they were winning. Judea was an occupied country by Roman soldiers, and these Jews would band together using guerrilla warfare because they knew the terrain.
Yeah.
And they would engage these Roman soldiers in battle, and they were winning. They were winning these skirmishes. There was one massacre that was just huge. And this is emboldening the Jews to be more involved. And so Jews from all over the known world were coming to fight because this is the chance that they have to be able to defeat Roman oppression.
But by all accounts, the Jews shouldn't have been beating these Roman soldiers, right?
No, because there was relative peace.
Yeah.
It wasn't...
Was it the defiling of the temple that kind of pushed
it
over
was
the edge?
defiling of the temple and the fact that now Rome has got to excise justice.
Okay.
Because they've killed Roman soldiers.
Yeah. Yep.
And so now they're fighting back and they're going at it. And the Jews are winning some battles. This is when a group of Sicarii zealots, they left and they invaded and they overtook the fortress palace of Masada. A lot of people have heard of Masada. About AD 66, they overtook, they completely butchered 700 Roman soldiers, overtook Masada, and there they lived throughout the entire Jewish war. And what they'd do is they would come out from the Masada, the fortress, and they would invade camps of Roman soldiers and then retreat back to their fortress. And that lasted for almost 10 years.
Wow.
They were able to do that.
Wow.
And that's
now you said Sicarii. That makes me think of the word Sicario, right? We've seen the movie
thing.
about
they were assassins.
Yeah.
Okay. They were Jewish terrorists.
Okay.
And we all know that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. And so if you were a Jew, these were freedom fighters. If you were not a Jew, these were terrorists. And they were trained to kill. They were trained to murder. In fact, in The Chosen, there's one. I don't know if you guys gotten that far.
I haven't gotten that far yet.
But this gets a Roman general by the name of Gallus, and he comes in with 30,000 Roman troops, which you'd think would be enough.
Yes.
But there again, the Jews overtake him and just absolutely obliterate him.
Okay.
They just wipe him out. And so again, that emboldens the Jews. Word gets to Nero, who is the reigning emperor of Rome. And so he's had enough. And so he sends his most popular and his most successful general, General Vespasian.
And this should be the end of it.
This should be the end of it, but it's not. Vespasian comes from the south. He has a son named Titus who's coming from the north, and they're going to come into Jerusalem or into Judea and overtake these cities. Vespasian comes to a city called Jotapata.
Bless you.
Yeah, I know it. Jotapata. Ben Yot is the name of it.
Okay.
And it's the first walled city that they have to deal with before they get to Jerusalem.
Okay.
Each city has their own wall.
Okay.
But Jotapata is one of the most secure because it's on the frontier. It's on the edge, and it's meant to be able to destroy any invading army, like a Roman soldier. Yeah. And Vespasian Titus, they were bringing 80,000 Roman soldiers.
Oh.
I mean, they were going to clean up.
Okay.
But they have to get by Jotapata. Titus isn't there, Vespasian is. And Vespasian knows that the city of Jotapata, even though it is walled, there is no natural spring.
Oh.
And so all they have are cisterns where rainwater is collected. And so he's thinking, all I got to do is wait, because it's the dry time of the year. All I got to do is wait them out, and they will either die of thirst or they'll surrender.
Okay.
And I don't have to ruin any of my Roman soldiers.
Right.
And so he stands off at a distance.
Like just far enough where like their spears or their arrows can't reach.
Right.
But close enough that they can't come out and get
he'll
water.
lob a boulder just to keep them guessing, that kind of stuff. Let them know he's still there. But the Jews can't get to him. But what they do, and this is a whole other story, which we'll not get into, but a guy by the name of Joseph ben Mataniahu.
Okay.
He is enlisted to be the general of Jotapata.
Okay.
And he's 29 years old. He's a wonderkin. He's a genius. But he's never led an army.
Yeah.
But they enlist him to be the general of Jotapata, and he recognizes that they cannot defeat the Roman army if they are out of range of their spears and arrows. Right. They have to get closer. But he knows what Vespasian knows. He knows that Vespasian is staying away because they're not going to have any water here pretty soon. So what he does, he gets his people, this is genius, he gets his people to get their linens and soak their linens in the remaining water and go to the wall and wring it over the wall, signaling to Vespasian, dude, we got all the water we need.
Whoa.
So much that we're willing to waste it right now. Vespasian bites. And he says, I didn't know that they had that much water. So he gets his troops closer and closer and closer. And now the Jews, who are about 40,000 strong in this walled city, they can be able to defend the city. And they do. I mean, they are fighting off. It was a 47-day siege, even where Vespasian was wounded. He got that close. Eventually, make a long story short, and the long story is just as good as the short story, but the long story short is they overtake.
Vespasian does.
Vespasian overtakes the Jews in Jotapata, and they get into the city, and Joseph ben Mataniahu, he and 40 others, they hide in a cave, probably a dry cistern. And they recognize that the soldiers are looting and murdering everyone in the streets. They're saying everyone is killed. They're sparing no one.
Men, women, children, everyone.
Women, children, everything. It is slash and burn. That's what they're doing. And they recognize Joseph and these other 40, they're not going to make it. If they're caught, they'll probably be crucified. And they don't want to do that. And so they're going to end their lives. But suicide is a vehement sin in Jewish culture. And so I'm laughing, it's not funny, but Joseph works out a mathematical system and does a count at every third person kills the number 2 person. So like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Wow.
And the third person kills the second person so that no one has to commit suicide. And
murder's okay, but not suicide.
Murder's okay. But it gets down to 2 people. And guess who one of the other 2 is?
Joseph.
It's Joseph. And they decide to surrender. He and the other guy decide to surrender. And I know.
How convenient.
I know, what a convenient way. And so, I mean, history's not too kind to Joseph, but Joseph's the one telling the story. And they find out Vespasian wants to speak to Joseph because he just admires Joseph's ingenuity. I mean, to last 47 days against a Roman army with Jewish...
Probably like bakers and
I mean, they're not farmers. They're not fighters. And so he wants to meet with Joseph. And it turns out that for whatever reason, Vespasian is impressed by Joseph because of this. This is what he says to Vespasian under captivity. You suppose, sir, that in capturing me, you have merely secured a prisoner. But I come as a messenger of the greatness that awaits you. You, Vespasian, are Caesar and emperor. You and your son here, talking about Titus. So load me with your heaviest chains and keep me for yourself. He's predicting that Vespasian is going to become the next emperor. And there's no way. I mean, Vespasian thinks it's a joke because he is not in line with the emperor. And so he decides to spare Joseph, and he acknowledges that, Joseph, I'm going to make you the historian about these Jewish wars. And he changes his name from Joseph ben Mataniahu to Flavius Josephus.
So he gets a Roman name?
He gets a Roman name, and the only reason why we know what happened with the Jewish wars is because of the writings of Flavius Josephus.
Wow.
And they're in our church library. I mean, it reads like a novel. It's incredible. And so Flavius Josephus becomes this, I don't know, recorder of everything that he sees.
Okay. Can we pause for a second?
Yes.
I'm thinking of all of the wars and battles in the Old Testament, where there's a lot of miracles recorded.
Yeah.
God did this. God did this. Yeah. The Jews triumphed. The Jews triumphed. Is that happening here, or am I reading into it?
Here's the problem that we have. It's a good question. The problem we're having is the person that's recording this is Flavius Josephus.
Yeah.
He's telling his own story.
Yeah.
And
so he can kind of write his own history.
Yeah. And so there are places where historians are saying clearly he is hyperbole. He's exaggerating.
Okay.
Because he is really the only known source that we have of an eyewitness of what's going on.
So we only have a Jewish recorder. We don't have a Roman recorder.
Not really.
Or
there
even
are a couple that did sporadic places, but not to the extent that Josephus wrote on the Jewish wars.
Interesting.
And that's the problem. So Jotapata is overtaken. Joseph ben Metanehu is renamed Flavius Josephus. And now Vespasian, because Jotapata is taken, the entire Judean Valley is at the mercy of Rome.
It's kind of opened up.
It's opened up. And I mean, Vespasian and his son Titus, they're going from town to town, absolutely wiping out. They are sending a message to the Jews. You will never, ever, ever raise a hand against Rome again.
Okay.
And they're making their way south to Jerusalem.
Okay.
They get to Jerusalem, and Vespasian, and we don't know if this is by intention or whatever, but Vespasian was a military genius.
Yep.
They get there in April of AD 70.
Okay.
And it's 2 days before Passover.
Okay. So high holy time.
High holy time. And so during these high holy times, what are Jews doing? They are going to Jerusalem because they're required to be there at Passover to make sacrifice in the temple. And Vespasian is saying, come on in.
Oh.
Come on in. Yes, absolutely. Worship your God on your high holy day of Passover.
I'll be a kind, benevolent general.
Oh, kind, benevolent. At that time, Jerusalem has probably had 70,000 people, regular, local people.
Okay.
This probably brought another 200,000.
Okay.
Same as during the time of Jesus' crucifixion. Vespasian lets them in. He won't let them out.
Oh.
Because he knows that there are all kinds of food sources stored away in Jerusalem.
Okay.
And when you've got 270,000 people, Josephus says there's 1 million, but there's no way that 1 million people could crowd in there.
Okay.
But 270,000 people using all the water sources, which they had natural water sources, but using the grain sources, you're going to have problems. But the other issue is the Jews were fighting against themselves. You've got the zealots that say, the only good Roman is a dead Roman.
Right.
We will die before we'll ever surrender. And then you've got the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians are saying, listen, diplomacy is the best way.
Right.
There's 80,000 Roman soldiers sitting around us. And the only way that we can be able to survive is by diplomacy. And the zealots, who are the aggressors, they're saying, who says we need to survive?
Oh.
And they start fighting themselves. They start fighting themselves. The zealots overtake the temple court. They completely wipe out. They kill their own people.
Wow.
Vespasian is knowing this. He knows this. And this is what he says. This is a quote from Vespasian, according to Josephus. Since our enemies I have a typo. Since our enemies are dying by their own hands, the best course of action would be to stay as spectators instead of taking on fanatics who welcome death and are already busy murdering each other.
Yeah.
So I'm going to save my Roman soldiers.
Yep.
You guys duke it out. You kill yourselves and we'll come in and clean up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's pretty much what happened to a point. But then what happened, meanwhile, back in Rome.
Okay.
Am I boring you?
Nope.
I
Nope.
hope
Nope.
not.
I'm with you.
Not.
I'm picturing, because I mean, you can picture it.
Yeah. Meanwhile, back in Rome, Nero has his own problems.
Okay.
Because he has lost his own guard. There are these civil wars that are going on to the point where he no longer has anyone to defend him, so he commits suicide.
Oh my gosh.
And so now there's no emperor.
Huh.
And if you ever took a civic class in school, in college, or in high school, then you know about the year of the 4 emperors, because in that 1 year of 70 A.D. there were 4 emperors: Gallo, Otho, Vesuvius, and they lasted a matter of months.
Wow.
Because of the infighting. And so the Senate of Rome recognized we need a leader who has the military, because that will be able to keep law and order. Do we know anybody like that?
Let's think.
And someone says, I nominate Vespasian.
Yeah.
All in favor say aye, aye. Everybody said Vespasian is our new emperor. So he gets called back. He doesn't really go to Rome. He goes south to Alexandria.
Okay.
But he is now the Roman emperor. And he hands the reins off to his son Titus.
The military reins.
The military reins. Yeah, thank you. The military reins. And so now it's up to his son Titus to lay siege to Rome. Or to Jerusalem.
Yep.
And so in comes Titus with his 70, 80,000 Roman. He's well armed, he's well manned, and the Jews are putting up a fight. And so he decides, I'm going to build some ramps to go up over the wall.
Okay.
And the problem is, to get to the living quarters of the Jews, there were 3 walls that they had to overcome.
Oh, gosh.
They got over, it took about a month, but they got over one wall. Then they got over a next wall. And then the 3rd wall was the biggest and the most formidable. And it was the one that would get you to the temple.
Okay.
And so they built a ramp. And get this is so interesting. They built a ramp to go up over that wall.
Okay.
And the Jews knew that there's no way that they could fight that.
Yeah.
Because the Romans had unlimited resources. So they dig a tunnel underneath the ramp.
Oh.
Underneath the wall,
Yep.
underneath the ramp, and the ramp caves in.
Oh, my goodness.
And all the battlements cave in. And all of that work, it just absolutely discourages the Romans, because they had put weeks and months into building that ramp, and these Jews had
kind of outsmarted them.
But that also became the gateway for the Romans to infiltrate the temple court. They came through that tunnel eventually.
Yep.
And they went into the temple court, and Titus, it is said by Josephus, gave very specific orders: do not touch the temple.
Okay.
He wanted to make that a trophy to his new emperor dad.
Not out of respect for the Jewish religion.
Oh, by this time, hundreds of thousands of Jews had been killed under the hand of Vespasian and Titus. I don't think he cared a hoot about the Jews. And so he said, leave the loot, leave everything in the temple, leave it alone. Soldiers couldn't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, their patience had run out. And it is said, according to Flavius Josephus, that one soldier threw a torch into the temple.
Oh.
And the cedars, they've been there for hundreds of years.
Oh, nice and dry.
And they were nice and dry, and it took nothing for the temple to catch fire. And so as they're watching this burn, the Roman soldiers go in and they grab all the candelabra, tens of millions of dollars worth of gold and things out of the temple courts. And Titus says, fine, the city's yours. And he allowed, this might be too inappropriate, but they had heard that some of the Jews had swallowed gold coins and silver coins. And so they killed the Jews.
Just cut them open
and disemboweled them and got the gold coins. That's how brutal this time was. It was just absolute animalistic mayhem of doing this. And Jerusalem fell. The city of David fell.
Wow.
It just fell. And all of the Jews were either enslaved, thousands of them were crucified. And Jesus says in Matthew 24, we'll talk about this in a second, that he's prophesying, and this is 37 years before this happened, that no stone will be left on another. And it's interesting because Titus has said, leave the temple alone. And yet by the time the Romans were done, no stone, and these stones, I've seen them, they're huge. No stone was left on another.
Wow.
And the reason for that is because the gold melted.
Oh.
And it would go into the cracks of the stones. And to get the gold, they had to remove the stones. And so they did. And so sure enough, the prophecy of Jesus 37 years before this was done. And Masada is still there, though. These Sicarii zealots.
Oh, that's right. They'd escaped to
They
Masada.
are there. And so Titus goes back victorious. He goes back to Rome. He takes all of the plunder from the Jewish wars back to Rome. In fact, to this day, I saw it a couple of years ago, there is this arch called the Arch of Titus.
Oh.
And etched in there are the Roman soldiers taking the giant candelabras out of the temple.
Oh, wow.
And it is said that all of the loot, all of the funds that were taken out of the Jewish wars funded the Roman Colosseum.
Oh, my goodness.
That's what paid.
Oh, my goodness.
That's what paid for the Roman Colosseum. You know, that's why it's just tragic.
Yeah.
Masada, the Sicarii zealots they last another 3 years after the fall of Jerusalem. General Silva, who is a Roman soldier, lays siege to them as well. And they build a ramp. They build a ramp up to the Masada. And the night before they were to break down the doors of Masada, the zealots there, they ended their own lives.
Yeah.
About 960 people ended their lives.
Were there a few left?
960.
No, did any people survive Masada?
Yes, 2 women and 2 children,
Wow.
I believe. Yeah, no, 2 women and 6 children. I think it's 10 people survived. And they bore witness to the fact that they drew lots. And so fathers killed their own families, their wives, their children. And then they drew lots to see who would kill them because suicide is a sin. And so it's just a time that is just absolutely brutal. And so why?
What does this have to do with church history?
Exactly. What does this have to? And here's the thing. Even Flavius Josephus says this. In the siege of Jerusalem, the fall of Jerusalem, not one Christian died.
Whoa. Partly
because both of the political groups of the Jews hated the Christians. These zealots, they were not in favor of, they hated Christians.
Yes.
But at the fall of Gallus, that first general,
yes,
he laid siege to Jerusalem and he failed miserably. But the reason why the Christians survived is because they left Jerusalem at that time because of what Jesus says in Matthew 24.
Okay.
They remembered what Jesus said, and he says this. In fact, I think I've got it here. I do. Matthew 24, verses 1 and 2. Jesus is with his disciples, and he says in verse 1, as Jesus left and was going out of the temple, his disciples came up and called his attention to its buildings. He replied to them, do you see all these things? Truly, I tell you, not one stone will be left here on another that will not be thrown down. So the disciples are looking at this beautiful temple. I mean, it really is.
Well, you said how many millions of dollars of gold?
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful. And when you go to Jerusalem, and maybe Lord willing, one day we can do that safely.
Yeah.
It's about 2 acres, and it's a mock-up of ancient Jerusalem. And the temple dominates the landscape. Yeah. It dominates the landscape. And no wonder the disciples, is this not an impressive? And Jesus says, yeah, there's going to come a time when not one stone will be on top of another. And he says later on in verse 15 of chapter 24, so when you see the disciples, they want to know, when is this going to happen?
Yeah.
We want to know, when's it going to happen? And Jesus says in verse 15, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. You're recording this just before the show started. Then those in Judea must flee to the mountains.
Oh.
And the abomination of desolation they took as a sign is a Roman staff with an eagle on the top came into the temple under Gallus.
Oh.
And they said, that is the abomination of desolation.
Let's go.
And so we're heading for the hills. And so they went to a town in present-day Jordan called Pella.
Okay.
That's where the Christians fled before Vespasian and Titus laid siege.
Because otherwise they would have died.
They would have been toast, either by the Jews or by the Romans, because both the Romans and the Jews hated the Christians. And the reason why that's significant for church history is because up to that point, Jerusalem was still kind of a seat of influence for the church.
Okay.
And because of that, they left and they took with them. But now They no longer had the anchor point of Jerusalem. They no longer had the anchor point of the Jews. They could no longer be under the umbrella of that.
Do you think part of it was they were culturally tied, like by tradition?
By tradition, because most of the Christians in Jerusalem were Jewish.
Right.
But the Christians outside of Jerusalem, many of them were Gentile.
Right.
And so the church needed to have some anchor points. They needed to have their own scriptures. And that's where the canon of scripture came about.
Right.
They needed to have leadership because most of the people didn't know. These Jewish or these Gentile Christians, they don't know the Old Testament. They knew nothing they just knew about Jesus.
Right.
And so they need to be taught. And that's where the episcopacy, they formed bishops.
Okay. Yep.
That could be able to oversee. They'd be educated and they would be teaching the people all of these things. By this time, the apostles were dying off.
I was going to ask you that. Do we know of anyone like that we know from the Bible that was alive during this time? Just John.
It's likely that John was the only disciple alive during the fall of Jerusalem, but John by this time was off in what we now know as Turkey.
So
Asia
John
Minor.
as in the Gospel of John and Revelation. John.
Yep.
That John.
The Apostle John. Yeah. The brother of James.
Yes.
And that's
the one Jesus loved.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the only one that we know for sure that was alive after the fall of Jerusalem.
Okay.
And so what the church needed was leadership because now they don't have any leaders. They needed a canon of scripture. They needed to know a way to have all of the documents, the writings of Paul, because by the fall of Jerusalem, Paul was gone.
Right.
Peter was gone.
Yeah.
But the writings went on. And so how do we know? And they were forced to decide what was true and what wasn't. And that's where you hear like the early church fathers like Irenaeus.
Yes.
And Ignatius and Polycarp and Proteus, all of these names that we don't necessarily know about, but they were the disciples of the original apostles.
And all of those names sound not Jewish.
Not Jewish, correct.
Maybe Greek or maybe Roman.
Probably more Greek.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just interesting. And that's why this was a turning point in church history, because the anchor for the church was pulled out. And it was already on its way out anyway, but it was finalized that way. And the Jewish influence over the church would begin to wane at that time because of the fall of Jerusalem. There's no temple.
Right.
And if there's no temple, there's no anchor point for the Jews. And so now the Christians need to find their own. And that's kind of what happened. I mean, and again, if you're a professional historian, I apologize because I left out so much.
Well, we don't have all day.
No.
I wish we did.
And there are so many things that is interesting about the Jewish wars.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
So, I grew up in the times of those, speaking of Christian media, those end times movies, which I can't, Thief in the Night.
Thief in the Night, yeah.
And I seem to remember that this passage was more about things to come and not things that had already happened. Help us understand kind of why you understand this as Jesus predicting what happened to Jesus recent or soon future. I don't know how to say that, not thousands of years later. Like this hasn't happened yet. So help us understand how you come to that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, Jesus makes a statement. I'm not, I just looked at it. Verse 33 of Matthew 24. I'll get a run at it. Learn this lesson. This is Jesus talking. Learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its branch becomes tender and sprouts leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, recognize that he is near at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place.
Okay. That's right there.
And so a lot of people, they load everything up saying this is all in the 21st century. This is all about the rapture. This is not about the rapture.
Yeah.
This is not about the rapture. Jesus is talking primarily about the fall of Jerusalem.
Jesus was warning the people in his very presence about something that was going to happen in their lifetime.
Yeah. But I would also say that yes, but the things that he talks about also are happening throughout history.
Okay.
These birth pains, these signs, and he gives like 10 of them that really had nothing to do with the fall of Jerusalem, but they're just prophetic in the sense that it's happening in all times. We tend to think it's just about all Jesus cared about is right now, where we are right now. And in some ways, that's true. It's not all he cared about
Right.
because we're multiple generations leading up to this. And that's very, very important. But a lot of people will put this about the rapture. It's not about the rapture. It just isn't. I wish it was,
Right.
but it's not.
But we put a lot of weight on prophecy in the New Testament as end times prophecy.
Yeah.
And this, for them, it wasn't end time.
No.
It ended a...
Yeah, they thought it was.
Well, and think about, it ended the time of when there was a temple.
Yeah.
It ended normal life as they knew it. It ended...
Their worldview was done at
Yeah.
AD 70.
Yeah.
It was done. Even for the Christians, because the Christians still cherish the temple.
Sure.
But not in the same way that the Judaizers did. And so it was a worldview change for them.
Wow.
And that, can we get, do you have any more questions?
Probably, but I think that does it for now.
Well, the behold part.
What happened next?
I know. It's really.
What happened in AD 75?
I know. And that's great too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so interesting of what happens. I mean, because one of these days we'll talk about how in the world did we get from the day of Pentecost to the Roman Catholic Church. What was that about?
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that probably next season or something like
Yay.
that. But behold-wise, all this while that Jesus is telling his disciples about the destruction of the temple, the reason why he's telling them this is because, for example, in chapter 24, verse 13.
You're in Matthew still?
Yeah, Matthew 24. Yeah, sorry. Jesus says in verse 13, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. This is good news of the kingdom will be proclaimed in all the world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. He said, I want you to endure because the things that you're experiencing now, it's going to be 70 AD, but it's going to be beyond that too.
Yeah.
It'll be in the year 2025.
Well, and I can't help think of the recent news about like coming out of the Congo where Christians were gathered up and beheaded.
70 of them. 70 godly Christians were taken into their own church and beheaded. Yeah. And that is commonplace everywhere around the world except here.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is calling us to endure. He says the same thing kind of in chapter 24, verse 44. This is why you are also to be ready because the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. And so Jesus is telling these things to his disciples and to us saying, you got to be ready.
Yeah.
I'm coming like a thief in the night. A thief doesn't make an appointment.
Right.
And so be ready no matter. Have your eyes up on the horizon. Because Jesus is coming back. And he's saying, I know this because I'm going to make a prediction that's going to come true in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Because the last thought in these Jewish disciples' minds is that the temple destroyed? I don't think so.
Yeah.
We've got this great symbiotic relationship with Rome. We're good. But yet in 37 years, Jesus said,
everything changed.
Everything changed.
And Jesus' words came to pass.
Yeah.
Because of course they did.
And since they did then, we trust him that they will again.
Yes.
That he's going to come back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jesus is good and he keeps his promises.
He does. He keeps his promises.
I tell the kids that all the time. This is God's word. It's true and God keeps his promises.
Yes, he does. Yeah.
I love that proof of his promises based on history.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this history isn't even in the Bible.
No, it's not. It's not. It's not mentioned anywhere in Scripture.
Right.
John is writing Revelation, for example, in AD 90-95, and he makes, some people say he's referencing the fall of Jerusalem.
But
I don't think he is because he would have stated that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Craig.
You bet. My pleasure.
Professor Hardinger.
Ooh, I like that. Can I get that on my stationery?
Sure. We'll make that happen.
Yeah.
Anything for you.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I learned so much. And again, I'm reminded of how good God is to us and how faithful
he is.
God is to his promises. And, in light of Jesus saying this is going to happen in your generation. And then there's historical evidence that it does.
Yeah.
It's the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
The proof is in the history. We have it.
Yep.
We hope you've enjoyed watching and listening. Hope you learned something. Maybe you took notes. Maybe you have questions about, well, what about this? Or why did that happen? Craig would love to answer them. Send them to behold@arcadechurch.com. We love getting emails from you. We're kind of saving them up right now for our live show, which is coming May 4th.
Coming up faster than we think.
I know. So we love having you listen. We love having you subscribe and comment and share. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to subscribe to our new Behold channel. That way you automatically get a notification when a new episode drops on YouTube. Between now and our next show, keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep beholding him. Keep remembering he is good and faithful and he keeps his promises. Until next time, take care.
See ya.
Bye.